Here it explains how the mode of goodness is especially favoured by the Lord. So that when one acts in the mode of goodness, then one gets benefited. He says that Krishna is impartial. It's just like he sets the whole situation in motion of this material world. He arranges everything and allows the living entity to make the choices. So in that way, Krishna is responsible. But ultimately, the responsibility lies with the individual of how he uses Krishna's energy, just like the electrician. He says the time factor in conjunction with the three modes of nature. So, time favours the mode of goodness. Do we have any practical experience of that? And time doesn't favour the mode of ignorance. We see that in contemporary society, and going back many hundreds and thousands of years, that when one acts in the mode of passion or in the mode of ignorance, the result is that it's temporary. Prabhupada writes in his purports many times about the different empires that have appeared and then fallen. They're actually prominent for some period of time, but sooner or later, due to them not being favoured by the mode of goodness, then they deteriorate. Whereas we go back to the Vedic age, when they used to follow Vedic principles and act in the mode of goodness, the kings were very pious. Then they used to rule over the whole world, and the world was satisfied because they were enforcing the mode of goodness. And they used to rule for thousands of years. So similarly, in devotional service, when we act in the mode of passion to try and perform devotional service, what happens after some time? Fall asleep. That's one thing. We find that actually it becomes difficult to maintain. Our material desires start to become prominent. But if we act in the mode of goodness, which means it's difficult to enforce, it's difficult to implement, but by acting in the mode of goodness, then we can actually maintain. So that's why all different transcendental processes, they advocate that we should perform austerity to come to this mode of goodness, because that's a platform of maintenance. Whereas if we're in the enjoying mood in devotional service, trying to enjoy separately from Krishna, then it's only a matter of time before this mode of passion or ignorance starts to diminish our ability to perform devotional service. So this is just one practical application of this particular verse, that if we want to maintain devotional service, then we have to maintain the mode of goodness. So Prabhupada said our morning program is activities of the mode of goodness, and depending on our meditation on them, they can become pure goodness, they can become devotional service. It's dependent on the living entity's consciousness. Krishna is providing facility for every living entity to approach him, but depending on the mode that particular living entity is in, will depend on how he will approach Krishna. So Krishna is providing an avenue for everybody to gradually come from that particular mode they're in to the mode of goodness, and then to the mode of pure goodness or devotional service. So this example of the electricity is very apt, because how many phases are there in electricity? Anybody know anything about electricity? There are 3 phases. It comes in here as 2 phase, 1 phase. But the original supply to any sizable department is 3. And so Prabhupada makes the example of the electrician or the user of the electricity. He can manipulate those. And what's 3 times 3? 9. 3 nines, 9 times 9, 81. So how many electrical appliances can we use? Ultimately. Just like there are 8,400,000 species of life due to this multiplication of these 3. So similarly, there are so many ways we can utilize our time in this world. So Prabhupada gives the very nice definition or example of electricity. Electricity is becoming more and more prominent in society. Every year, every week, there's new appliances coming out, so the actual usage is unlimited. But there's only one. I say the usage of this material world is unlimited, but there's only one way we can actually approach Krishna. So this is what Krishna is saying, that we should endeavour to come to the mode of goodness. This is why the demigods are successful in this particular battle with the demons, because they're following the law of the material universe. It's constructed in such a way that if we use it in the mode of goodness, then we're successful. And the demons are trying to go against the law of the universe, so therefore they're acting in a lower mode, and that's not empowered by Krishna to be successful. But what's the problem with these modes? In the Bhagavad Gita, it explains this point. We may experience this all in one day, actually, in devotional service. Rajastamas chabdi bhuya sattvam bhavati bharata. Rajasattvam tamas chaiva tamasattvam rajastataha. Sometimes the mode of goodness becomes prominent, defeating the mode of passion and ignorance. O son of Bharat, sometimes the mode of passion defeats goodness and ignorance, and at other times ignorance defeats goodness and passion. In this way there is always competition for supremacy. So even in the mode of goodness we're at risk. This is the point. Why? Because the modes are in flux. In the battle of Kurukshetra, what happened when the night time came? They stopped fighting. When any of the devotees in the Mahabharata or Ramayana are fighting against any adversaries, especially if they're Rakshasas, what do they fear? Obviously the Rakshasas are fearful enough, but as they're fighting and the day's wearing on and it's coming towards twilight, they're becoming fearful, because what happens at twilight? The mode of ignorance starts to predominate, and the Rakshasas are in what mode? Ignorant, and then they become very powerful. So we see in devotional service why there are certain times in the day when performance of devotional service is very helpful to our advancement in devotional activities. So, mode of goodness. So in the Bhagavad Gita also, this is a testimony to this particular verse. Verse 5:14 says, the embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature. Nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. So this is just cementing what we've just read, that Krishna sets the whole scene in motion and allows us to act. And depending on how we act, we get the result. So if we want to do anything, even in the material world, and be successful and make it ongoing, we have to be situated in the mode of goodness. So this is why it's advised that we should follow the Shastras. In the Shastras it says if we want to get good results, then we follow the Shastras, and then we get sense gratification, but it's in the mode which we can maintain. So in Bharatvarsh or in India, most of the people know that. So even though they may not be so religious, they go to the temple every so often and they put some money in the box and offer their obeisances to the deity. Because they know that if they don't do that, their enjoyment is going to be curtailed at some point. So although we have a Hare Krishna temple here, many are not devotees. Many come to maintain on the good side of the Lord, so they can maintain their sense gratification. There was in India, thousands upon thousands years ago, this is a story from the Krishna book. just to prove this point about the mode of goodness being the best. There were sages at the Sarasvati River. They were having a meeting and they were discussing who's the most powerful deity, who's the highest quality of deity, who's the supreme deity. And they were arguing between which three is it? Lord Brahma, Lord Vishnu, and Lord Shiva. So we know this story. They deputed Bhrigu Muni to Bhrigu Muni. That's specific meaning Muni. Actually, we'll discuss that in a minute. Bhrigu Muni, he was deputed to find out who was the most qualified deity. So first he went to Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma was his father, and he completely ignored him when he walked in the room. And Lord Brahma was inside, he was very angry. But because he had intelligence, he controlled his anger. And then he went to Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva was his brother. And when Lord Shiva got up to greet him, he started to embrace him. He said, "Don't touch me, you hobgoblin." He called him so many ill names. And Lord Shiva became immediately angry because he was a deity of the mode of ignorance. And he was about to kill Bhrigu Muni, his own brother, with his trident, until Parvati stepped in and pacified him by paying obeisances to him. But then, amazingly enough, he went to Lord Vishnu, who was laid with his head on Lakshmi's. Anyway, he was with Lakshmi, and he went straight up to Lord Vishnu and kicked him on the chest. And both Lakshmi and Lord Vishnu got up immediately, paid their obeisance, and asked him, "If we are very sorry that we didn't see you come in. You have a right to be angry with us." So this is the mode of goodness. There was one point here, actually, Muni. Why did he kick the Lord on his chest? He's supposed to be a transcendentalist. He's supposed to be a person who's coming to the mode of goodness. And why did the sages, well, the sages are not at fault, but he's at fault for doing something like that. Why did he do that? Would you do that? Well, Muni means a person who's endeavouring for spiritual realization. He's not got to the point of being freed from this material world. There are three types of transcendentalists. And because Bhrigu Muni was only on the platform of being a Muni, he didn't know who the Supreme Lord was. He didn't have the intelligence. But the next stage is what they call a Shanta, or one who is very peaceful. This is the next stage, that he's actually attained transcendental realization, is beyond the modes of nature. And what's the last one? The last one is Sadhu. Sadhu is a devotee. He's fixed in devotional service. So this is why Bhrigu Muni acted as he did. So this is the modes of nature and how they're affecting us, and why the necessity for working in a particular mode is more elaborately explained in this verse now. But the next part of this particular verse is the partiality of the Lord. How the Lord is impartial. Even though he seems to treat the demons in a rough way. They're defeated, they're completely annihilated. Is that actually the Lord's anger, or is it the Lord's mercy? If we're looking from a demon's point of view, it'll definitely be the Lord's anger. Even in devotional service, when things are not going right, sometimes we'll think, is Krishna on my side or not? This is due to ignorance, actually. So most people who are not on the mode of goodness, in fact everybody who's in these lower modes, then they'll see Krishna's activities have been untowards. This is why Maharaj Parikshit is asking this question. He's asking it not because he's in doubt, but he's asking it for the benefit of society, so that they can understand the Lord's activities, that the Janma Karma Chamedevam is beyond the modes of nature. And when we come to realize that factually, then we engage fully in devotional service and become freed from this material world. But whenever we have a doubt about Krishna's motivation, then we'll always be a tendency to work on the material platform and stay in this material world. So it's important to come out of these lower modes, even if we want to maintain devotion. This is why we have to come to mode of goodness. We'll doubt Krishna at some point if we're not in the mode of goodness, because we're thinking about our own. We're not thinking about the reason for creation. We're thinking about our own particular pleasure within this material world. So mode of goodness is an effort. It means that we have to put ourselves second and put the devotees and the Lord first. But then actually we find that we become satisfied. We become satisfied in our activities. So. Oh, there's one. Maybe you've heard this story, but I'll repeat it for those who haven't. There was one king, and he was always doubtful about the position of the Supreme Lord. He was in one of the other modes, sattva, rajas, or tamas, or a mixture. And actually, we shouldn't be so complacent. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that this is about his disciples. That if you could raise one of his disciples to the mode of passion, he'd be very happy. So we should be thinking in those terms also. Anyway, this king, he had a very intelligent and very devotional minister, and he was always preaching to the king. When the king became upset about certain situations due to these lower modes, the minister, who was actually a devotee, he would preach to him. And so he was giving him good counsel. But one day they went on a hunting trip together, and they were going through the forest, and all of a sudden the king's horse balked, it reared up and threw the king to the ground. The horse had stopped because there was a snake in the path, and that snake went up and bit the king on the finger. And then the minister, realizing that this was a deadly bite, that it would kill the king, he said, "You better cut your finger off straight away before the poison spreads to the rest of your body." So the king did that. He cut his finger off. But then he was so angry. He said, "How can the Supreme Lord do this to me? I'm a pious king trying to rule the citizens. I'm bending over backwards to try and make it a devotional kingdom." And he got really angry with the minister. He said, "You were always giving me all this information. Look what's happened." So he threw him in jail, his minister. So anyway, the king then went on another hunting trip without the minister. And this time they were attacked by some dacoits. There were only a few of the king's men, so the dacoits easily captured them. And they were looking for a suitable specimen of a human being to offer to Mahabhairava. This is the ghastly form of Lord Durga. And so when the dacoits brought the king before the king of the dacoits, he was ecstatic. And then he looked at him, and then all of a sudden he noticed he hadn't got a finger. One of his fingers were missing. And so to actually offer anybody to Mahabhairava, there has to be a complete person. So they kicked him out. Said, "Go on, you can go home." And so I thought, wow, he realized that actually the Lord is so merciful. If I'd have had a whole finger, I would have been dead by now. So he was running home to the palace, and he went straight to the jail and let the minister out. And he was telling the minister, "You're always being right." And he told him what had happened to him. He said, "But I can't understand why," because he was still in doubt. He was still in the mode of passion. And he said, "Why did Krishna allow me to put you in jail, and you were actually faultless?" He said, "If I'd have gone with you, I've got all my fingers." So we should be thinking like that Krishna is always looking after the welfare of the living entity. Sometimes it's a matter of state. When we're in the mood, this is why it's so... Lord Chaitanya said that, what's our most important mantra? Trinada peace and each. It's humility. One should be more tolerant than a tree, lower than the grass in the street, ready to offer all respects to others. So why is that? Practically, why is that? Because in that mood we can actually accept advice and we can work at it. And when Krishna's in the heart, when Krishna sees that, he doesn't have to deal with us in a rough way. Just little bits, just to keep us on a straight and narrow. We get little corrections. But because we are actually resent or repentful from when we've done something wrong, or we're trying our best to rectify, and we're always in that humble state of wanting to hear advice from devotees, what can Krishna do? He can just encourage us. But if we don't maintain that humility, if we don't wear this verse around our neck and implement that, then we lose the thread. We can't see when we've been properly directed. We can't see Krishna working in our lives. And so at some point it says, Yashaham anugrinami harishe tad janam shanai tato gyanam tidanchasya svajana dukadukitam. Then Krishna has to take some very serious steps in a devotee's life, just to shock the devotee back into that submissive consciousness. This was what happened to Prabhupada. Well, Prabhupada was not actually an untoward devotee, but he used to read this verse very often, and he realized that it applied to him because Krishna took away everything. He says, when I especially favor some devotee, I take away all his wealth. And then the friends and relatives of that unfortunate soul, seemingly unfortunate soul, they all reject him. And he suffers again and again, one misery after another. And then his only recourse is what? To take shelter of Krishna. So when something happens to a devotee, which is very severe, we can understand that Krishna's checking him from making a big mistake in his devotional life and putting him back on the straight and narrow. He's putting his consciousness in line with what it should be. So this is one aspect. So that one last point is that when Krishna, so there's reactions still seem to go on when we carry on in devotional service. Prabhupada likens it so that when we pull the plug out of the wall and there's a fan connected to the electricity, then the fan will eventually wind down and stop. So a devotee's karma is gradually being reduced because he's not performing any more sinful activities, but he's engaging in the mode of goodness activities and devotional service. But actually the Bhagavatam goes a stage further than this. In the 88th verse of the 88th chapter of the 10th canto, 8th verse, this one we've just mentioned, and Prabhupada explains there that these difficulties we experience, it's like when we put if we've got a contaminated eye. What do we put ointment on the eye, and it stings like anything. But the result is after some time we get the benefit of that medicine. He says, so the difficulty a devotee experiences in devotional service is like that. There's some pain in the heart, pain in the mind. But that pain doesn't have the same effect as material pain. Material pain means that it gives another reaction in the future. Material suffering means another reaction in the future. But in devotional service, it means that pain completely purifies that devotee of the tendency to commit that activity again. So the point is that we have to see Krishna's helping hand in every situation. And this is why Maharaj Yudhisthira asked this question at the beginning of the 7th canto, for the benefit of conditioned souls and devotees as well, that we don't doubt Krishna's position. Due to our contamination, we think Krishna's like us, and therefore we are in doubt about Krishna's character. So we have to see from a higher standpoint, from Shastra and from the devotees. This is a second-class intelligence. And not experience this third-class intelligence where we have to go through some real difficulty in order for Krishna to put us back on the straight and narrow. So we can stop there anyway, it's getting late. Does anybody have any comments or any questions?